Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs, and I'm here to tell you to vote for this adorable Vex. Picture the scene. You're out here in the forest gathering your first tools, you're probably getting a ton of saplings dropping on the floor as you're picking up all of these oak logs, but then along comes an adorable little fairy and starts picking up all of the saplings for you and dropping them next to a note block. You have just encountered the Allay, the newest mob that Mojang has announced for the 2021 Minecraft Live mob vote, and frankly, this thing looks like the most useful mob Mojang has proposed in a very, very long time. Because who wouldn't want to be brought cookies when they're playing Minecraft? According to the video, the Allay would basically be trained to pick up an item that you give it, just right-click on the Allay presumably, and you'd give it the item that you wanted it to collect, and it would simply drop it off next to the nearest note block in the area, because Allays love music. Maybe they would dance if you played a note block nearby, or a jukebox, kind of the way parrots do, but the Allay, not you, you're not an Allay, get out of here. The Allay that you had trained to collect the saplings in the previous example would simply drop them off next to a note block, and I can show you one way in which this becomes immediately useful. Bam! As long as this behavior is somewhat consistent, you could train Allays to automate the task of collecting items for you, and instead of just dropping them on the ground at your feet, they would drop them off basically wherever you left clusters of note blocks, meaning these things are effectively automated collection systems without the need for water, without the need for players collecting them, without the need for long hopper lines. You could basically train them to take stuff wherever you wanted. Basically what you've got is a helpful Vex that flies around collecting stuff that isn't iron swords and death. Now once again, Mojang's video on the subject has not been super informative about where you would find them. Jens appears in a forest, although Agnes found the glare underground, and a few people have pointed out that the glare doesn't seem like it would make much sense underground, or maybe if it did, it would be in a lush cave where there's already a lot of light. But if Jens is in a birch forest or some kind of forest scenario, and these little things are just kind of flitting between the trees, it seems like a sensible environment for you to find them. And then how exactly you convince them to follow you around remains to be seen. Perhaps you would have to bait them around with some kind of item that they really like. Perhaps you control them using note blocks, as though the note block is like a villager workstation to them. But in theory, you could take the Allay more or less wherever you wanted. And here is where the potential for this mob absolutely skyrockets. Let's suppose for a second that you've come down to an area that you are strip mining or branch mining out, and you're picking up a whole bunch of different blocks as you do. You've got iron, maybe iron ore if you're silk touching it. You've got yourself some granite, some regular stones, some cobblestone because you've had to switch to your fortune pickaxe to mine some of the ores. You've got some redstone. You've got all kinds of other materials. You've probably even got some diorite, and your inventory is filling up pretty fast. You want to save all of these materials for a build project, but you don't really have the means to carry them around. Preserving materials like this without shulker boxes basically involves a lot of trips back and forth to a series of chests, at which point you're probably just going to have to leave some stuff on the floor to despawn. Not anymore, because all you need to do is train one of the Allays to carry a specific type of block. You just right-click on it with some andesite, and it picks up all of the andesite that you're leaving on the floor. Same goes for cobblestone, same goes for stone, and it's not just one Allay you would have to have either. You could potentially have a whole army of these things working for you. And while that does kind of feel like you've just become an evoker, it also means that you would be able to have them pick up most of the different types of resources that you would find down here, leaving you to just pick up the stuff that needed condensing, like the iron or the redstone that you could condense into blocks, and that way you could focus on the precious stuff while the Allays do the work collecting up all of the rest of the junk. Not only that, but if the Allays kind of pair to different note blocks the same way villagers pair to their workstations, you could end up with one Allay going to this note block, one Allay going to that note block, and effectively what you've done is create an auto sorter using mobs instead of using water streams and item filters, which could completely change the game in terms of the amount of redstone you need. Now, they haven't really talked much about the range at which they would pick up items. It's fairly certain that they aren't going to mine things for you, so they'd probably end up picking items that were dropped on the ground, or at least had fallen on the ground as you were in the process of mining them. It's picking up item entities in much the same way that dolphins do. And Minecraft's mob AI, while it can be robust in some circumstances, might not be up to the task of pairing to all of these different note blocks, and the amount of these working in an area could potentially cause a little bit of lag as their AI decides to cope with the tasks they've been given. But they have been optimizing the AI for villagers and some of the other mobs recently, so potentially they're working out ways of making that a little bit of a cleaner process for players who are dealing with that amount of lag. Depending on how possible it is to train the Allays to collect items and how easy it is to get them to follow you, you could end up with a whole army of these things collecting stuff for you. And in theory, imagine that a sorting system isn't this big. What if it's this big, or even bigger? You can end up with Allays transferring items to all of these different hoppers if they can be attuned to different note blocks. And speaking of attuned, of course, note blocks actually have a whole different range of sounds applied to them depending on what block is below them. By adding different blocks underneath, we can change the instrument of these, but we can also change the tuning of them up to 24 different notes, I think. I think it's about 2 octaves that the note block spans, which means potentially if an Allay gets tuned to a specific note, then you could multiply the amount of different note blocks that they could be attracted to. And if an Allay sings along with your 8-bit note block, then potentially it will only drop stuff in an 8-bit note block's corresponding hopper, meaning that you could program these things to sort stuff for you. Now, this is all pie in the sky thinking, of course. This is all potentially what could happen, and in reality, it might be very complex to make something this sophisticated. But the worst case scenario is that you could have a sorting system next to one of these note block drop-off stations, and all that has to happen is that the Allays drops things in this hopper here, and then it goes into your sorting system from there. The fact that something other than the player can collect and distribute items into a sorting system is kind of unprecedented in Minecraft, and I think that is a really fascinating concept for them to roll out for this year's mob vote. Now, I don't think that these things are going to work like sniffer dogs in the way that the glare does for light. I don't think it's going to work quite that way. So, for example, you couldn't use it to help you mine diamonds, and in fact, you probably wouldn't want to take it diamond mining because you don't collect diamonds all that often, and you probably want them to go into your inventory straight away. So I doubt you could guarantee finding diamonds frequently enough that an Allay would really be helpful in picking it up for you. Likewise, mining for netherite or something like that, you wouldn't really expect it to be able to pick up the netherite for you. Aside from that, I expect it would probably die in lava if you were mining for netherite with it, but the fact is that the thing is going to be very, very useful picking up items. They didn't say how many items, of course, so it could be that its inventory is limited to a small number, but it could always go and deposit them near a note block and then come back to collect more, and as long as it can do that within 5 minutes, those items aren't going to despawn. But naturally, if you want to go branch mining and you fill up your inventory with all sorts of other items so that you're not collecting anything else, the Allay is going to follow along behind you and pick up all of the blocks that don't go into your inventory. So all of this gravel, all of this flint, you could give that to an Allay and they'd be able to ferry it back to your chests without you having to lift a finger. In a way, your inventory kind of becomes the auto-sorting system, because then at that point, you're just filtering out all of the items that you want to collect for yourself, and the Allay is taking care of the rest. At the end of the day, this kind of thinking has the potential to turn Minecraft on its head and turn a relatively mundane activity into something that players have so much more control over, and I find that a really fascinating concept. Also, I really hope they're a little bit more sturdy than the video made them look, because otherwise, killing an Allay on a multiplayer server is going to be punishable by death. I have a feeling that these things are going to be something you protect with your life, and as long as they can't fly through walls like Vexes, hopefully that will be a little bit easier. But you do not want to have one of these things near an open lava lake, because they could just fly in there with all of your diamonds, and that would be the end of that. Before we go, here are a couple of other scenarios I've thought of where an Allay would be really, really useful. Let's say, for example, that you have painstakingly lit up an area of a cave like this because you want to turn it into some sort of base, and then, purely by accident, disaster strikes, and you clumsily let loose a water bucket which is going to sweep all of the torches from this area down into the bottom of the cave. Disaster, you think. I'm going to have to collect all of those torches again because coal is so scarce down here. Now, perhaps that's not going to be a disaster after all, because all you would need to do would be to pop down a note block with a hopper next to it, hand a torch to the nearest Allay, and say, hey, come back when you've gathered all of the torches that I just spilled all over the floor. You grab what you can, you continue lighting up the area, and once you return, you find that the Allay has gifted you with a stack of torches that errant water bucket just washed away. One of the things I really miss about Minecraft, and I miss it since the update Aquatic, is the fact that now that items float, it is really difficult to gather sand and gravel from the bottom of the ocean, because when you rise to the surface like this, you have to float around, whether you've got a boat or whether you have to just float around naturally by yourself, picking up all the individual items because they don't group together into stacks anymore. Or I guess they do, but they're still very, very spread out. Now imagine you emerge from all that sand mining only to find that your faithful Allay has put all of the items in a chest for you. Here is another great example, amethyst geodes. How difficult is it to collect all of the shards from an amethyst geode? Well, not all that difficult really, but it's a bit of a pain because half the time you've got to parkour between all of the different budding amethyst blocks in order to pick up the crystals, because sometimes if you don't want to break them, then the crystals just end up dropping on top of blocks and it's difficult to get them, whereas with an Allay you could just ask it to pick up all of the amethyst shards that drop, and that way you don't need to worry about those occasional shards that go missing when you're fortuning all of your amethyst clusters. There are so many tiny little ways the Allay could be the most useful mob in Minecraft if it ends up getting voted in at Minecraft Live. So once again, much like the glare, I'm asking you to vote for this mob as well. You can kind of see the trend here. I'm going to tell you the reasons to vote for each of these mobs and let you make up your own mind. I wasn't all in on the grumpy lettuce from the beginning. Frankly, I think the Allay could be a fantastic addition to Minecraft, and I do hope that you voted in. But I do wonder about the name, actually. I feel like Allay is such an interesting word to choose. It kind of sounds like the French Allay, and so I can imagine French players saying like, go, get this thing for me. But I am kind of curious about what kind of impact it would have on the game. Do Redstone players think this is a good idea, or do they think it kind of invalidates their efforts at making sorting systems? We'll have to see what behavior the Allay has if it's added in, but if this one doesn't get the vote, I really hope they add it in future, because a mob with this kind of power is going to be really valuable to Minecraft players if it gets added later on. Also, a geode would be a really nice atmosphere for it, because I get the sense that it would really love music, so I wonder if they would do something specifically with amethyst and this mob as well. Maybe you find them in amethyst geodes. Maybe they live in here, and that's what makes them so difficult to find, because they'd have to be quite rare considering how powerful they could be. Anyway, hopefully that's given you a bit to think about, and hopefully you are a little bit more informed about the choice you're going to be making this weekend at Minecraft Live. Thank you so much for watching this video. My name has been Pixlriffs. Please don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.